In part, early this morning, FBI Boston's Safe Streets Task Force, with assistance from the US Marshals and Coventry, Rhode Island Police Department, detained a person of interest in a hotel room in Coventry, Rhode Island. So first and foremost, what are the implications of having an FBI director who just can't stop but fall over himself to try and tweet out information before it's thoroughly vetted?
You know, Brian, first of all, nobody can ever accuse Kash Patel of learning from his mistakes. As you point out, he made the same, boneheaded decision to prematurely put out what proved to be wrong information in the Charlie Kirk case, and now he's gone and done it again. And let me tell you, when I read his post, Brian, this is like a study. This is like law enforcement 101 of what not to do. And I'll talk in a minute about how it could negatively implicate the case in the event Kash Patel eventually gets it right and apprehends the actual Brown University killer in this case. But what I want to do is just turn to the three things that he said in this post and then explain to our audience why it is that none of these things should have been posted, never mind by the director of the FBI. The first thing he posts is, FBI Boston established a command post to intake, develop, and analyze leads and run them to ground. First of all, what he says there is law enforcement is doing what law enforcement does, which is really not something you have to take the time to post to people other than just to put on a big splashy show. He really can't shake the fact that he used to be a podcaster, and it really didn't matter what he spewed into the public square. Here's the second thing. We activated the FBI's cellular analysis survey team to provide critical geolocation capabilities. What does that do, Brian?
We just watched him post before he had all the information about the Brown University shooting, about the suspect who was apprehended. It ultimately turned out not to be the suspect in this shooting. He did it during the Charlie Kirk shooting, where he wanted to go on Twitter, wanted to get all the praise for acting quickly, and the person who he tweeted about during that shooting also ultimately ended up not being the person who had committed this crime. Let me put right here on the screen Kash Patel's tweet. He wrote in part, "Early this morning, FBI Boston's Safe Streets Task Force, with assistance from the US Marshals and Coventry, Rhode Island Police Department, detained a person of interest in a hotel room in Coventry, Rhode Island." So first and foremost, what are the implications of having an FBI director who just can't stop but fall over himself to try and tweet out information before it's thoroughly vetted? Brian, first of all, nobody can ever accuse Kash Patel of learning from his mistakes. As you point out, he made the same boneheaded decision to prematurely put out what proved to be wrong information in the Charlie Kirk case, and now he's gone and done it again. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. And let me tell you, when I read his post, Brian, this is like a study. This is like law enforcement 101 of what not to do. And I'll talk in a minute about how it could negatively implicate the case in the event Kash Patel eventually gets it right and apprehends the actual Brown University killer in this case. But what I want to do is just turn to the three things that he said in this post and then explain to our audience why it is that none of these things should have been posted, never mind by the director of the FBI. The first thing he posts is, FBI Boston established a command post to intake, develop, and analyze leads and run them to ground. First of all, what he says there is law enforcement is doing what law enforcement does, which is really not something you have to take the time to post to people other than just to put on a big splashy show. He really can't shake the fact that he used to be a podcaster, and it really didn't matter what he spewed into the public square. Here's the second thing. We activated the FBI's cellular analysis survey team to provide critical geolocation capabilities. What does that do, Brian? That signals to the bad guy, oh, let me dump my phone, right? Because now that he is actually sharing sources and methods and law enforcement activities while the investigation is ongoing, the only thing he has succeeded in doing is tipping off the bad guy and making himself look like a buffoon in the process. And here's the third thing he posted. As a result, early this morning, FBI Boston's Safe Streets Task Force, with the assistance from the US Marshals Service and Coventry, Rhode Island Police Department, detained a person of interest in a hotel room in Coventry, Rhode Island, based off a lead provided by Rhode Island PD. What are we doing there? What are we seeing there? He's disclosing information about where the person he believed to be the shooter was located and what's actually going on at this moment in the investigation. First of all, the public, the people don't need this information. They have no right to this information, and they shouldn't have this information. Why? Because what this does is it kind of poisons the public. Well, and now somebody might say, oh, you know what? I want to take advantage of potential reward money. So I'm going to say that I saw the killer go to that motel in Coventry, Rhode Island. Yeah, that's it. Because now I know that that's where they are interviewing a suspect. You're providing evidence about an ongoing investigation to the public, which I say they don't have a right to know and they shouldn't know. And here is how this could impact the investigation and the prosecution moving forward. When you arrest the wrong person, or you announce you have somebody in custody who's a person of interest, which obviously sends the signal that we've got the killer, and it turns out to be the wrong guy, you've made the prosecution's case much harder, and you have given ammunition to the defendant and his attorneys when they ultimately go to trial. Because what this does is it creates actual evidence of what we call a third-party perpetrator defense. The FBI director said, in essence, in substance, we've got our man. We're wearing him out in a motel right now in Coventry, Rhode Island. That is evidence. And now we know he got it wrong. At least that's what the reports are. Just disregard everything I just posted. My bad. That was the wrong guy. That gives actual evidence to the shooter, the person who, if ultimately apprehended and put on trial, will be able to use those statements, use that evidence as a third-party perpetrator defense, and argue, ladies and gentlemen, there's no way in the world a responsible FBI director would have put that information out publicly if he wasn't damn sure he had the right guy in that motel. And guess what? That guy, not my client who's on trial here today. And that's just one reason you should have reasonable doubt and you should find my client not guilty. This is like stupidity writ large. It is incompetence writ large, and it is a refusal to learn from one's mistakes. None of this recommends Kash Patel to continue in the job of director of the FBI. Doesn't it also put the public at risk because now your guard is down, because you think that the actual perpetrator of these crimes, the actual killer here, has been apprehended, and so suddenly you can let your kids go back outside? Everybody can kind of breathe a sigh of relief here, and all the while have no idea that the perpetrator, the killer, the shooter may just be right in front of their faces. That's another downside of Kash Patel prematurely spewing this nonsense into the public square, especially when it turns out that it's wrong. You know, there are so many reasons that this is not something we've ever seen a director of the FBI do previously. Most of them had some sense of how to go about running what used to be, and I think still is ultimately the nation's preeminent law enforcement agency. But for the fact that the leadership right now, Kash Patel, Don Bonino, they just don't have any business being in those positions. Yeah. In terms of what the fallout could be, I mean, look, the reality is that the people who are at top of the leadership for these law enforcement agencies are there not because they're qualified for their jobs, not because they're competent, but because they're going to show blind deference and loyalty to Donald Trump. And so in terms of consequences or fallout, do you anticipate that there's going to be any, or so long as they continue groveling at Trump's feet? That's just how it is in today's DOJ, FBI, and on and on. Yeah, Brian, that's kind of a coin toss, because in the first Trump administration, when a cabinet official would make Trump look bad, when he or she would receive all kinds of criticism for the way they were bungling the responsibilities they had in whatever their cabinet job happened to be, he would throw them under the bus in a minute. So even though he would want to bring unqualified lapdogs into the job, he didn't want them to embarrass him. And this now, as you pointed out at the top, with Kash Patel doing it twice and not learning from his mistake the first time, I mean, this makes Donald Trump and his administration look lower than whale shit on the competence front. So it wouldn't shock me if maybe the second time is too much for Donald Trump to endure and he gets rid of Kash Patel. And then, of course, who in the world he will tap to replace him is anybody's guess. But sometimes we say the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. When the devil we know, when it's Kash Patel who is putting law enforcement at risk, he's putting the public at risk, he's giving actual dangerous folk who commit crimes built-in defenses that they wouldn't otherwise have if he wasn't such an incompetent imbecile. Sometimes I think we have to take our chances on the next devil. You know, I think I hear everything you're saying, but I think perhaps a bigger problem for Trump would be, in some roundabout way, conceding fault here by admitting that Kash Patel had done something wrong and so he had to fire him. I think a bigger priority for Trump is pretending that everybody around him is perfect and that he made the perfect decision by appointing all of these people to their positions. And so in an effort not to seem like he's done something wrong, in an effort not to show some semblance of weakness by saying, okay, this was a mistake, or appointing Kash Patel was a mistake, I think he's just going to double down and say strength in my administration looks like never admitting fault, even when it's so apparent, even when Kash Patel continues to fuck up time and time and time again. And so there's a big part of me that thinks that, especially in these moments where somebody in his administration drops the ball, is when he's going to not do anything, expressly so that people don't think that he's weak by virtue of firing them, and as a result kind of inadvertently admitting fault. Yeah, so I want to talk about the other side of that coin. I agree with you. That's one perspective. And Donald Trump is known to double and triple down on his own bad decisions and poor choices. But first of all, he fired cabinet members in his first administration. And then what did he do? He tended to blame the pick, not on himself, because even though he was the final decision maker, he would blame it on somebody else. There is sort of a similar experience that we're seeing right now in the second administration, where all of these Trump-appointed judges are ruling against Donald Trump. So what does Donald Trump do? Well, it was the Federalist Society who really picked those judges, and I just agreed with the picks that they forwarded to me. Again, the buck never stops with Donald Trump. He will always point fingers. So if he ends up getting rid of Kash Patel, it won't be because he made the wrong decision. It will be like, well, you know, Kash Patel, I think I'm familiar with him. He was a coffee boy, but other people said I should make him the director of the FBI, so I did. And you know what? They gave me bad advice. This is his MO. Yeah, 100%. I mean, both of those scenarios I think are perfectly feasible. It just depends on, frankly, how he's feeling that day. And honestly, the last person to get in his ear, because whatever he spouts is usually the result of that. It's worth asking here, is there any impact that the other prosecutors in the FBI can have? I mean, clearly they know better. It's Kash Patel who's the newcomer here. It's Kash Patel who's the showboat here, who just can't rid himself of this Trumpian tactic where he just has to very quickly garner all of the credit and praise for himself. But what are the prosecutors in the FBI, the rank and file, the attorneys who work there? What are they thinking or doing as a result of this? Probably shaking their head in despair and going home and drinking. I don't mean to make light, but there is a general counsel's office, and I have known some of the FBI general counsels over time, and they're there to give kind of real-time legal advice to try to keep the director of the FBI and other FBI leadership out of hot water, investigative hot water, legal hot water, and to try to make sure that they're not damaging the prospect of a successful arrest in the first instance, and then ultimately a successful prosecution. So I am sure they have been trying to give Kash Patel their best advice on legal matters in the event Kash Patel is including them and not cutting them out when it comes to sort of the legal ins and outs of the way they're going about their operations and their investigations. And you know, I'm sure that the good, honest people who remain in the FBI, just like the good, honest people, the good career public servants who remain in the Department of Justice, and of course the FBI is a component within the Department of Justice, I am sure they're beside themselves. I have a feeling they're probably trying to revisit the decision daily as to whether they should stay and try to be guardrails, or whether they can no longer buy into being a part of an administration run by the likes of Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, because it would be, from my perspective as a 30-year Fed, it would be really hard for me to labor under that kind of leadership, with the word leadership in air quotes, if I knew they were doing the wrong thing every day and they weren't even willing to take my advice about how to go about doing things the right way. I mean, that is really a lot for a federal government employee, a good, hardworking prosecutor or FBI agent who understands that they are there to represent the interests of the American people, not dear leader in the Oval Office. It would be a really hard pill to swallow coming into work every day and having to contend with that. Well, look, something tells me that this is not the last time that Kash Patel is going to do exactly what he's done here and exactly what he did in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk shooting. So obviously a lot more to come on this, whether it's Kash Patel's actions or how this case plays itself out given Kash Patel's incompetence at play. Let me add some additional context here because what Glenn is describing isn't just bureaucratic incompetence. This is dangerous, reckless behavior that undermines law enforcement, endangers the public, and provides get-out-of-jail-free cards to actual criminals. And it's happening because Trump appointed a loyal podcaster with no qualifications to run the FBI instead of someone who actually knows what they're doing. Think about what Kash Patel has done twice now. He's gone on social media before investigations are complete to announce arrests or detentions of people who turn out not to be the suspects. He did it with the Charlie Kirk shooting. Now he's done it with the Brown University shooting. And Glenn laid out all the ways this is catastrophically bad for law enforcement and public safety. First, he's revealing investigative techniques, announcing that they're using cellular analysis and geolocation capabilities tells suspects to dump their phones. That's operational security 101. You don't tell the bad guys what methods you're using to track them while you're actively tracking them. That's insane. Second, he's contaminating the witness pool. By announcing where a suspect was detained, he's given anyone looking for reward money specific information to falsely claim they provided tips about. That makes sorting credible witnesses from opportunistic liars much harder. Third, and this is the most damaging, he's creating a built-in defense for the actual perpetrator when they're eventually caught and tried. Defense attorneys will absolutely use Patel's premature announcement about the wrong guy as evidence that there was another suspect, creating reasonable doubt about their client's guilt. Imagine being a defense attorney in the Brown University shooting case. You get to stand in front of a jury and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the FBI himself announced they had detained a person of interest in this case. The director of the FBI doesn't make announcements like that unless he's certain. But it wasn't my client, it was someone else. And that creates reasonable doubt about whether my client committed this crime." That's a gift-wrapped defense handed to a potentially guilty person by the incompetence of the FBI director. And it's entirely preventable if you just wait until you actually have the right person and sufficient evidence before making public announcements. Fourth, as Brian pointed out, it puts the public at risk. When people think a killer has been apprehended, they let their guard down. Parents let kids play outside. People go about their business thinking the threat has passed. But if you announce the wrong person, the actual killer is still out there, and people are more vulnerable because they think they're safe. This is basic law enforcement competence. This is stuff rookie cops learn in their first week. Don't compromise investigations. Don't reveal methods. Don't announce arrests prematurely. Wait until you have solid evidence. Protect witness pools. Don't create defenses for criminals. But Kash Patel can't help himself. He's still operating like he's a podcaster where saying controversial things quickly gets you attention and engagement. Except now he's the FBI director where premature statements endanger investigations, compromise prosecutions, and put the public at risk. And he's not learning from his mistakes. He did this with Charlie Kirk. Got it wrong, got criticized, and then did it again with Brown University. That's not someone who made an error and learned from it. That's someone who fundamentally doesn't understand the job or doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. Now the question becomes, will Trump fire him? Glenn and Brian laid out both scenarios. On one hand, Trump has fired people who embarrassed him before. This makes Trump's administration look incompetent. Announcing the wrong suspect twice is not a good look. So Trump might decide Patel is a liability and replace him. On the other hand, Trump hates admitting mistakes. Firing Patel would be an implicit admission that appointing him was wrong. And Trump's brand is built on never admitting fault, always doubling down, always insisting everyone around him is perfect. Plus, Trump can always blame someone else. He's done it before. When his judicial appointees rule against him, he blames the Federalist Society for recommending them. When cabinet members fail, he claims he barely knew them or that they were someone else's pick. The buck never stops with Trump. So if Trump does fire Patel, he'll say something like, "Kash Patel? Great guy, barely knew him. Other people told me to make him FBI director. Turns out they gave me bad advice. I'm actually the first one to notice he wasn't doing a good job. Everyone's saying I was so smart to let him go." But there's also a decent chance Trump just keeps Patel, because firing him would look like weakness. And Trump's entire brand is built on strength, even when that strength is just doubling down on obviously bad decisions. Either way, the American people lose. If Patel stays, we have an incompetent FBI director compromising investigations and creating defenses for criminals. If Patel goes, Trump will replace him with another unqualified loyalist who may be even worse. And the career professionals at the FBI are stuck in an impossible situation. They know what Patel is doing is wrong. They're probably trying to give him good advice through the general counsel's office. But if he's not listening, if he's cutting them out of decisions, if he's just acting on impulse to get social media engagement, there's not much they can do. So they face a choice every day: stay and try to be guardrails, hoping to minimize the damage and protect some institutional integrity, or leave because they can't in good conscience be part of an administration where the FBI director is actively undermining law enforcement for personal publicity. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. Career FBI agents and Justice Department prosecutors should be able to focus on investigating crimes and prosecuting criminals, not managing the incompetence and ego of political appointees who have no business running law enforcement agencies. But that's where we are. That's what happens when you prioritize loyalty over competence, when you appoint podcasters to run the FBI, when you care more about never admitting fault than about actually having qualified people in critical positions. Kash Patel is going to keep doing this. He's going to keep jumping on social media before he has complete information. He's going to keep revealing investigative methods. He's going to keep announcing wrong suspects because he either doesn't understand why it's wrong or doesn't care because the social media engagement is worth it to him. And every time he does it, he makes law enforcement harder, he makes prosecutions more difficult, he creates defenses for guilty people, and he puts the public at risk. That's the cost of incompetent leadership. That's what happens when you run government like a reality show, where publicity matters more than getting it right. Subscribe to follow this story and all the other ways the Trump administration is undermining core government functions through incompetent appointments. This isn't just about Kash Patel. This is about what happens when you destroy institutional knowledge and expertise in favor of personal loyalty to one man. The FBI will survive Kash Patel. Career professionals will keep doing their jobs as best they can despite him, but the damage is real. Cases will be harder to prosecute. Criminals will have defenses they wouldn't otherwise have. And the American people will be less safe because the person running the FBI cares more about Twitter engagement than doing the job right. That's the legacy of this administration. Incompetence elevated to positions of power, expertise dismissed as disloyalty, and the American people paying the price for it all.